Welcome back. This is the Fantasy Endgame, and we've got more league winners for you. We already broke down 8 players that could help you win your fantasy football league, and now we've got more. Who's your first one? It's a receiver, of course.
My first one might surprise a lot of longtime viewers of Fantasy Endgame, and that is DK Metcalf, a guy I haven't really been on the last couple of years. I felt like he is overdrafted, but now I feel like he might be a little underdrafted because I'm loving what I'm seeing from the Seattle Seahawks offense so far. I've talked about the benefit of both pre-snap motion and play action as far as its effect on the passing game. On plays where there is pre-snap motion and or play action, passer ratings go up significantly. And there's only been 2 teams so far this preseason to use pre-snap motion at least a 70% rate. One of them are, of course, the Miami Dolphins, who use pre-snap motion like we've never seen before. The other one is the Seattle Seahawks with new offensive coordinator Ryan Grubb coming over from Washington University. That's going to be great for DK Metcalf because sure, he's still going to play that X wide receiver role, but they're going to have him in motion before the snap. And this is also a big thing because wide receivers who go in motion before the snap are targeted at a higher rate. Also, Ryan Grubb's offenses the last 2 years in college were one of the leaders in average depth of target. So not only is DK Metcalf going to be used in pre-snap motion, but he's going to be used a ton down the field. We haven't really seen DK Metcalf fully unleashed since year 2 when Russ was still cooking. Look, maybe Geno Smith can't ever cook like Russ did, but I think in this offense, with the way they're going to use him, we're going to see DK Metcalf cook, and I think this year he's going to have quite possibly his best season ever and be a league winner.
Well, you're talking pre-snap motion, moving in the slot a little bit more often. That brings to mind a receiver who was already really good last year and in one of the best offenses in the league. I'm talking about Devonta Smith for the Eagles. I really think Devonta Smith has his best season yet because we know that the Eagles did struggle a lot last year, especially early on because offensive coordinator Brian Johnson just seemed in over his head, which is why he's no longer there. And they brought in a guy that you might be familiar with, Kellen Moore, who did some good work in Dallas, and then with the Chargers, put up some big passing numbers there, and the receivers thrived. And when I say receivers, I mean more than one. Even though A.J. Brown, of course, is still there, I think Devonta Smith might pass him to be the number 1 receiver there, at least in terms of fantasy. I feel like nobody's talking about the fact that A.J. Brown was a huge disappointment at the end of last year, especially in the fantasy playoffs. Remember, he just fell off and nobody could really put their finger on why. Now, I'm not worried about AJB. I still think he's one of the top receivers in fantasy, but I really think that the gap between these 2 players is not that big, and it's much bigger in drafts than it should be because I think Devonta Smith is legitimately just as good and will be just as productive. Again, he's going to get moved around more. We're going to see him in the slot where he could thrive for sure. And again, last year we already saw toward the end of the season, Smith was basically surpassing A.J. Brown from weeks 9 through 17. AJB averaged 63 yards per game, a couple of duds towards the very end of the season. Devonta Smith averaged 73 yards per game and scored twice as many touchdowns. Now, it's going to be fine to have either of these guys, but one of them costs you basically a first-round pick, and then Devonta Smith is a 3rd rounder, sometimes even a 4th rounder. I'm going to go with Devonta Smith, who could be a number 1 receiver available at a wide receiver 2 price. Which leads us to another number 2 receiver on his team who is going to be better than a lot of number 1s on other teams.
Yep. Talking about that Dolphins team that uses pre-snap motion. We talk about it a lot. Not talking about Tyreek Hill, of course. He'll be great. But I'm talking about Jaylen Waddle, who I think is going to bounce back in a big way this year and help you take home a fantasy championship. It's easy to forget just 2 years ago, his second year in the league, had 1,356 receiving yards and 8 touchdowns, while Tyreek Hill had over 1,700 yards and 7 touchdowns that year. And remember that year, if you think back, Tua missed 3 games that year as well. So what happened last year? Well, it was his health. And I know you look and you say, well, he played almost every game. He wasn't that, banged up. But look at 2022, his second year in the league, when he had over 1,300 yards and 8 touchdowns. He only played less than 70% of the snaps 3 times that entire year. Last year, 8 times he played less than 70% of the snaps because even though he wasn't out for that week, he was far less than 100% trying to gut through it. He's 100% going into the season. We got to bet on him staying 100% all season long, which you have to do on pretty much everybody you're drafting in fantasy. And if he does, this is a guy I think can have an even better season than he had in year 2. Sure, Tyreek Hill is still going to be great, but there's enough here for both of these guys. One of the most forward-thinking offenses. It's basically Tyreek Hill, Jaylen Waddle getting all the targets in this offense. I really think Jaylen Waddle has top 10 upside at the wide receiver position, and I think he's ready to win you a fantasy championship.
All right, let's pivot to quarterback. My philosophy in a redraft league, I don't feel like I have to be one of the first to take a quarterback. And by that, I mean, I don't want to be one of the first 5 or 6 players to draft a quarterback, because there's always a quarterback in the mid or even the late rounds that has massive upside. How about a known commodity like Kyler Murray? That's right, Kyler Murray is not going to be one of the first quarterbacks drafted, but he still has the upside to be one of the top quarterbacks. Last year, of course, draft value for Kyler Murray was tanked because he wasn't playing the first half of the season. And then he came back and he actually looked pretty good, but he should have been so much better. And by him, I don't really mean him personally. He actually was even better than I expected. It's that offense was hurting because the lack of receiver depth really showed. I mean, Hollywood Brown, I don't know what happened. I mean, he just did not look like the same player mid-season. I mean, he had this 4-week stretch where he just didn't look right, and then some injury problems, and now he's gone. Well, here's a gift for Kyler Murray. How about the top receiver in the draft class, a generational talent like Marvin Harrison Jr.? Oh, and Trey McBride is still there as one of the top pass-catching tight ends in the league. And here's the most important thing. Kyler did play throughout the second half of last year, but he wasn't 100% coming off that injury. We're going to see him run more and more effectively this year. And so that rushing upside is just going to take off. So we might see Kyler Murray have his best season legitimately. I'm in on him as a quarterback. I don't have to pull the trigger on too early, but I don't have to worry about that position there once I have him in my lineup.
Do you want to win your fantasy league but don't have time to do all the research? Are you tired of drafting mediocre teams and then having to constantly hope you hit it big on the waiver wire just to compete? Do you wish you could have a fantasy expert like Pierre or myself with you while you draft? Well, now you can. With our app Draft Lane and our live draft pilot, we will guide you through every pick of your draft and tell you exactly which players we would pick if we were on the clock. Our proprietary algorithm will take into account your league settings, scoring, and roster requirements to identify the best picks every time you are on the clock to ensure you have a winning team from week 1. It's the closest thing you can get to having us there drafting with you. Get the biggest edge in fantasy football. Just go to your app store and search for Draft Lane and download it today and get ready to dominate your draft.
All right, time for a running back and kind of a later pick here you feel is being slept on.
Yep, Javonte Williams absolutely being slept on. I've talked about him all offseason. I'm going to keep talking about him all the way up to draft day because he is clear, head and shoulders, the RB1 in Denver. There is no doubt at this point after 2 preseason games. The other running backs, Pirine, the rookie Estime, McLaughlin, they're fighting for that number 2 and 3 role. It is Javonte's backfield. And look, Bo Nix has actually kind of looked good. Maybe this offense won't be a complete train wreck, or okay, maybe it still will be a complete train wreck, but there's still a reason to really like Javonte Williams this year, and that is the pass catching work, because Sean Payton's offenses, every year he's either been the offense coordinator or the head coach, have been top 5 in targets to running backs. Last year, they were number 1. You look at Javonte Williams as a rookie, ranked 17th in targets despite splitting with Melvin Gordon all year. And then you look at it last year, also 17th in targets despite coming off ACL and being limited. Now as the number 1 running back in this Sean Payton offense, I think he could get close to 50, 60, hey, maybe even 70 catches depending on how Sean Payton feels about the other running backs in this offense. And look, I kind of compare him to Rachaad White last year. This was a guy, didn't get 1,000 rushing yards, didn't get double-digit touchdowns, but he was a top 5 running back in fantasy because of the work in the receiving game. Look, I'm not saying Javonte Williams is going to be top 5 this year. That feels like a stretch. Even top 10 probably feels like a stretch, to be honest, for Javonte Williams. But he definitely has the upside for top 15 if he's catching 60-plus catches. And look, you're talking about a running back going barely inside the top 100 picks, sometimes outside the top 100 picks. If you get a top 15 running back at around pick 100 or later, I don't care what his name is, I don't care what offense he's in, he will be a league winner.
All right, now I got to throw a tight end in there. I feel the same way as I do about quarterback. I don't need to be the first to grab one of those elite players at the position. Just because they were elite last year doesn't mean they'll be elite this year. But I don't also love punting or streaming position all year. Give me someone who's a solid starter, available like top 10, 12 at the position, with upside for much more. And to me, tight end, that's Jake Ferguson. He really could have put up better numbers last year already. Might be shocked to realize that Jake Ferguson led all tight ends with red zone targets in 25. And that continues all the way down and get closer to the goal line. He had 12 targets inside the 10-yard line, leader among all tight ends, and he even had 9 inside the 5-yard line. And yet somehow, despite all that, he only scored 5 touchdowns last year. Really should have done better. And so regression, it happens, right? We look at touchdowns, it's fluky. I know that you can't project, touchdowns for any position. But still, I have a feeling he's going to score more touchdowns than he did last year. And there's not a lot of depth really behind him. Brandon Cooks is still there. Look, Jalen Tolbert maybe will shine as a wide receiver 3, but this is an offense that needs another reliable target. And Jake Ferguson really proved to be that for Dak Prescott. I'm looking for a guy who has, again, a tight end, so much more important to get that touchdown upside because there are not that many tight ends that really haul in a ton of targets. So Jake Ferguson is a guy that if I'm waiting on tight end, which I like to do, I'm targeting him a lot. And of course, the best league winners are those really late running backs and those rookie running backs. So who you got in mind?
I got Kimani Vidal of the Chargers. I'll be honest, obviously we talked this guy up all offseason after he was drafted by the Chargers. I started to back off early in camp because he wasn't getting, good buzz out of camp, but I loved what I've seen from this guy in preseason so far. Over half of his rushing yards have come after contact. This is a running back, 213 pounds, ran a 4.46 40, handled over 300 touches last year, had over 1,800 yards, 15 touchdowns. He's not some little scat back. He's a guy that can handle a 3-down workload. But what I've also liked, because you don't want to get too caught up in what a guy's doing against backups or third stringers, right? Because he should be, playing well against those guys. But I also like the way this Chargers offensive line is looking. They are run blocking great. Jim Harbaugh has got them ready to go, and they're also using the tight ends in the run blocking. I think this is going to be one of the best run blocking offensive lines in the NFL. Now, right now, Vidal is clearly behind Gus Edwards and, for some reason, even J.K. Dobbins, because these guys haven't been playing in preseason. Vidal has. That pretty much tells you that, okay, Gus Edwards and J.K. Dobbins are their starters. They want to keep him healthy. But look, Gus Edwards is what he is. He's a 2-down bruiser with, goal line potential. I'm still not buying into J.K. Dobbins coming off of 2 major injuries in the last 3 years. Look, Vidal probably not going to start out of the gates red hot for your fantasy team, but he's going to be one of these guys that comes on late in the season and helps you win a fantasy championship when it matters most. So if you're in deeper leagues with deeper benches, definitely try to stash Vidal while you can. You don't want to be fighting for him on the waiver wire later in the season, because I really think this guy, by season's end, will look back and say, yeah, he helped me win a fantasy championship.
I love that pick, and I'll go with a guy that I haven't changed my tune on, even though, ironically, I was convinced before the NFL draft that he was going to be the Chargers running back. It just made too much sense, right? The Michigan connection with Harbaugh. But Blake Corum might have wound up in a better spot, even though he's still in LA, because that Rams offense, it's just money for any position, honestly, but especially a running back. Kyren Williams, I don't want to take anything away from him. He looked great. He ran tough. He did it all, right? But he's had some issues, and by that I mean foot and ankle issues. It's carried on. I can't ever guarantee that a guy stays healthy. Of course, you can't predict injuries either. If something happens to Kyren Williams, Blake Corum will not only be the top waiver wire pickup in any league he wasn't drafted, he will be a league winner. And all I have to do is point you to Kyren Williams from last year. It's that simple. And look, they didn't just wait until the 6th round to draft a running back. They took Corum in the 3rd round. And these days, that's actually pretty high draft capital for a running back. McVay, he's very loyal to the guys he picks, and he saw something in Corum. He fits this scheme, and he is getting really good buzz so far in camp. And so it just makes sense. You want a guy who has the highest upside. It's got to be the backup running back in the Rams offense. And Blake Corum is a player I loved. No matter where he ended up, I was going to be interested in him in fantasy this year. And I think this could have been the perfect situation if things break right for him. And if for some reason you missed our first league winners video, well, those 8 players are right here.